Welcome to Making Democracy Work, brought to you by the League of Women Voters. Every month, we talk about topics of community interest. This month, we're going to talk about bail reform, and we have with us some very good experts. The paper? Mandy Fernandes, Policy Director of ACLU of Hawaii, and Kamaile Maldonado, Public Policy Advocate of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs. I'm Pearl Johnson of the League of Women Voters with my co-host, Kaui Lucas of the League of Women Voters. Thank you all for being here. Now, what is the need for bail reform?
So the need for bail reform is that the entire concept of bail has been completely skewed in the last many decades, actually. And so what has happened is that bail started out as a pretty reasonable idea. The whole purpose of cash bail is to ensure that somebody shows up in court. So the logic behind that is that if you put up a certain amount of cash up front, you can be released pre-trial, and then because you have that cash and you have that surety, you're more likely to show up to court so that you can get your cash back at the end of trial. But what's happened is that bail is now, more often than not, used as a mechanism for detention and not release. And what I mean by that is that it's set according to whatever you're being accused of, and not necessarily your individualized factors like your ability to pay. And the second thing that's happened is that there's an entire profit industry that has developed around bail, so the bail bonds industry. And there's this profit motive of having bail set at very high amounts.
Do you have any idea how large that industry is? Just ballpark.
Oh my gosh.
No.
It has to be a multi-billion-dollar
Oh, in
industry.
the nation? Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's certainly, an industry here in Hawaii, and that is what we've seen coming out of some of the hearings and some of the opposition that we've had from the bail industry. And some have not been opposition. Some have seen, real life and how bail can negatively impact people who are involved in the justice system. But when you come down to the purpose of bail, just to make sure that somebody shows up to court, that means that if bail is set at an amount that the accused cannot afford, bail is useless because it doesn't achieve its purported purpose. Because if that person can never post the bail, then that's not what bail is for. Bail is supposed to be so you can afford to post it, but it's enough that you are more likely to show up in court. What we found with research, so this is sort of a reasonable idea, right? But what the recent research that's come out of places like Colorado is they've seen that it doesn't actually make a difference. Cash doesn't make a difference. So people who are released just on their own recognizance are just as likely to show up to court as people who are released and posted cash bail. So bail is not effective, and when it's ineffective, it's resulting in the detention of people simply because they're too poor to get out. It doesn't serve public safety. We all want to make sure that our streets are safe and our communities are safe, but bail does not make us any safer.
I was shocked to read on the website of Oahu's Community Correctional Center, OCCC, that the whole thing was built for pretrial detention. I don't know how many people are incarcerated pre-trial around those numbers, but that's a lot of people.
So at any given time, around 50% of the people being held in OCCC, which is a jail, are pre-trial. So these are people who have not been convicted of a crime. These are legally innocent people who may have been wrongfully accused. They might be wrongfully charged, and they are sitting in jail. And often, if somebody is sitting in jail and there has been bail available to them, it's because they cannot afford to post that bail.
And I just want to add really quickly, a couple years ago, Mandy shared a study with me from the Arnold Foundation, which demonstrated that with just a few days in pretrial incarceration or in jail, just generally, can lead to really dire consequences, including like the loss of job, housing, even children and family in some cases. And so, like, obviously, if you just stop showing up for work and you stop paying your rent, you're going to get kicked out. And so that's kind of what happens to a lot of people when they can't come up with the money to secure their release. And also that same study demonstrated that just a few days in pretrial incarceration was linked to and correlated to longer jail stays, longer prison stays, greater likelihood of conviction. And so actually, when we're talking about just a few days in jail, we're talking about a lot more than just a few days in jail. And so it's a big difference that obviously disproportionately harms poorer defendants who are going to be less likely, less able to pay for their way out of jail when they're offered a cash bail than wealthier defendants who could just get out on the day that they're arrested, for example. And so, yeah, because these consequences disproportionately impact the poor, that's why we see overcrowded facilities, and we see so many community advocates so interested in this issue now, especially now with the great deal of overcrowding that we're dealing with in so many of our facilities, and just in general. This movement across the nation is really responding to this kind of idea that jails are essentially jailing poor people, not dangerous people necessarily.
Yeah, and recent research that's come out of Harvard actually suggests that pretrial detention, and that sort of goes off of the study that you were just discussing, has a criminogenic effect and actually results in increases somebody's likelihood of reoffending once they get out.
By being detained pretrial. Wow, I wonder how they figured that one out, but that's certainly shocking in and of itself.
Yeah.
There have been states that have had bail reform. What has been their experience?
So a state like California, which has essentially done away with cash bail and eliminated the profit industry around cash bail, which seems like it's a really good idea, but what they didn't do is provide any sort of safeguards against then the net widening, so people are then just more likely to be denied release altogether. So they've widened the net of people who are eligible for detention. And so we don't see California as a positive model at all.
But there are safeguards other than bail where someone is released and then supervised to make sure that they will appear.
And what we'd like to see is the least restrictive conditions. So maybe sometimes cash is the least restrictive condition. But often and especially for the poor, that's not the least restrictive condition. And we should, when we consider things like monitoring, ankle bracelets, first we have to ask who's paying for that. If it's incumbent on the accused to pay for their own monitoring system, if they're paying $200, $300, $400 or $1,000 for something like an ankle bracelet, then that doesn't do anything to actually solve the problem of penalizing people because they're poor. And is it really necessary if they can be released on their own recognizance and still be guaranteed to show up to court and they're not a threat to an individual person in the community?
So how do they how does that guarantee happen?
There's never a guarantee. There's always going to be some. There's always going to be some ratio of the population who is going to not comply with the conditions of their release or not show up to court for whatever reason. But there are just studies that demonstrate, like she said, that having that security isn't necessarily, it doesn't provide a statistically significant difference in appearance rate. But what it does do is provide a very statistically significant difference in the amount of people that you end up detaining, and that detention can be very expensive. So if I would like to talk a little bit about bringing it to the Hawaii context, since we kind of looked at the national level. So what does that mean in a context like Hawaii, where we have 7 out of 9 of our facilities are overcrowded? When you look at the design capacity, 4 out of those 9 are overcrowded when you look at the kind of operational capacity, which is what they've modified it to.
We have the OHA graphic. You guys put together this very nice summary. So we'll be showing some of those.
So that will demonstrate how, when we're looking at the operational capacity, meaning like a kind of modified capacity based on, can we move some out of bed here, move some people around there, then we see that 4 of those facilities are still overcrowded, and all 4 of them are county jails. And some of them are at almost nearing 200% capacity by that measure. By the other measure, the capacity that they were designed for, all of them are nearing or over 200% capacity, meaning like HCCC is at 300% capacity almost. So we're talking about 3 people in a space for 1 in a facility that is, filled with people who are, like Mandy said, not convicted of a crime, still technically innocent. And so this is at a very high cost to that and to all those individuals who are being detained. Like I said, housing, employment, sometimes their families even, and it's at a very high cost to their families, losing that income in the household for whatever period of time. And it's at a very high cost to the community and the taxpayers. It costs $182 a day to incarcerate a person in Hawaii, and that adds up to about $66,500 a year, which is $7,000 more than the average state employee makes in a year. So, you know, we're taking people away from their jobs and we're paying more than that amount of money to hold them while they await their trial. So it's not an effective system, and it's a very expensive system. And as Mandy said earlier, over 40% of this very overcrowded, extremely inhumane, and extremely expensive population to detain is at all of those jail facilities are pretrial. So not convicted, innocent, technically innocent people like sitting in there, and we're paying a lot of money to keep them there.
So,
And to speak, so sorry.
go ahead.
No, to speak just briefly, to touch on something that Kamaile brought up about the cost to the actual individual. So if somebody's facing these two terrible options, right? So if they are accused of a crime and they're sitting in OCCC pretrial, they have the option of paying a high amount of bail and returning to their families, returning to their jobs, or they might risk losing their jobs, and they might risk losing custody of their children. They're not going to be able to, if they have elder care responsibilities and all of those responsibilities that you have in life, and they might not be able to be there for that. And just to speak to actual numbers, the median amount of bail set on Oahu for a Class C felony, so that's $750 felony theft threshold. So
Yeah, stealing an iPhone.
Yeah, stealing an iPhone, being accused of stealing an iPhone. The median amount on Oahu was $11,000. How many of our families have $11,000 just hanging around? No, and we've actually seen research in Hawaii recently suggesting that only about half of our families have the means to meet basic needs. That suggests that half of our families at least don't have $11,000 sitting around to post bail.
And as we're talking about, I just want to talk a little bit about length of stay, because that's another big piece of this. When we're looking at how long are we talking about people sitting in jail awaiting trial, or just the ability to get out somehow. A study in 2008 of 39 large U.S. counties, of which Honolulu was the largest, found that 32 counties were able to release defendants under non-financial conditions in 15 days or fewer, but Honolulu's average length of stay for the same types of defendants was 71 days, making it the longest average length of stay in jail for people who were actually ultimately released pretrial. Like, people, eventually the judge was like, okay, yeah, you can go, but they stayed longer than any of those other counties. And so some more recent data demonstrated that those numbers have come down a bit, but we're still seeing very long lengths of stay for bail and bond. In 2016 was about 38 days, so that's like over a month, and that's for people who, right, that's for people who post bail and bond. But I would note that people who are released eventually on their own recognizance or supervised release, meaning the unfinancially secured forms of bail, are actually twice as long, meaning they stayed in jail for 85 days for ROR and 97 days for supervised release. So like 3 months awaiting a judge to tell them, okay, you seem safe enough, let's add some conditions and like some supervision, and let's let you out. Yeah, so
I just want to go back to the part where I thought you said that people who paid bail were still in jail.
people who pay, when you pay your bail, you can be released.
Okay.
And then you just have to show up at your trial and abide by all the other conditions that the judge sets, and then you can get your cash bail back. But again, that option is kind of reserved for the people who can afford it. And there are some places in the statute that kind of essentially imply a requirement that judges should consider a defendant's ability to pay, because obviously, $10,000 could mean nothing to some defendants, and $1,000 could mean everything to others. And so you have to kind of consider, how much is a reasonable amount to get this person to come back? And for some people, that's much lower because of their means. And so what we're seeing is there's not a lot of clear data telling us how many people are remaining in jail because they cannot afford bail. And over those long periods of time. But what we're seeing are long lengths of stay, which are, like I said, have been coming down in recent years, but are still quite long. And overcrowding in every single jail facility, which, again, like I said, are mostly pretrial people.
So so I wanted to get back to that part of the pretrial hanging out at OCCC. So we have some pictures of the task force, some of the members of the task force, which actually you were part of, Kamaile, but not on that particular field trip. But you've done the field trip.
Yes.
And it was
it's incredible. It's incredible. There's no.
It's horrifying. I just thought, wow, I don't know how people can go to work in this facility and treat other human beings that haven't even been judged. I had no idea, really.
Yeah. It's breathtaking, yeah. It's so difficult to understand, but at the same time, it kind of comes a little bit, it comes a lot to bail reform and pretrial issues, but it also comes a lot to, it speaks a lot to the issues of resources and just like in general having too many people incarcerated. And that has to do also with sentencing and the sentenced people, the people who have already been convicted. There being too many of those people as well. Same thing goes in the prisons. The prisons are overcrowded as well, and so. It's not a thing that's limited specifically to jails, although that is where our biggest issue is, especially with OCCC, which is extremely outdated and extremely inhumane conditions, because there's just so much that needs to be done, so many repairs that need to be done that, as you guys know, they are now considering replacing OCCC and moving it to a different location, which has kind of pushed along this whole idea, this effort. Once the legislature got a $550 million bill from public safety about this is how much it's going to cost to actually try to build a facility for the amount of people that you have sent us, and the between the laws and the courts, like this is what we have, and there's nothing we can do about it except for build a bigger facility somewhere else that's going to be more humane. But that got everybody's attention, and that really motivated the legislators to create HCR 134 task force, which to look at how can we, refigure our bail system so that we can be releasing more of these people who potentially pose no risk to the community and would show up for their court dates.
I'm shocked that the median amount of bail is $11,000.
That's for
Now,
just a Class C on Oahu.
Now, if someone were to use a bail bondsman to post that, it would cost them over $1,000, which they would never get back.
Correct.
And if they were found innocent, the whole thing would have cost them $1,100, which is, if you were to get $5,000 bail, then that would cost you $500, which you would never get back. Well, no wonder the bail bond industry is fighting tooth and nail.
Of course. And who does that adversely impact? It impacts the poor. It impacts, so in the example that you said, that is a person who cannot afford to post that on their own without the assistance of a bail bondsman. And it's a person who was innocent at the end of the day. So this system privileges the wealthy and penalizes people for being poor, because they're the only difference between two people who are being accused of the exact same crime, and one walks free and one sits in jail and loses their job and loses their kids, is that one has money and one does not. And that's wrong. And it violates the Constitution, because the Constitution requires that liberty be the norm and detention be the exception.
Well, let's talk about what the legislature is considering.
Well, I just wanted to get back to something Kamaile was talking about with when the task force was formed, because they said, a new jail is going to cost us $500 million. Well, we do, at least at this point right now, it is open to negotiation that we can do something different that would cost a lot less, in that we could buy the federal prison, which is being underused, the one at the airport. So
Yeah, well, that measure died, I think.
no,
It didn't?
No, and I understand that
It's still moving?
It's still moving.
Oh, okay.
Or
Well,
I'm not sure. Anyway, I think that there could be some news next week.
oh, okay. That's interesting. Yeah, so we haven't weighed in on that measure because, one, I'm not really too sure that the feds want to sell us their facility. But on top of that, the Federal Detention Center was really made, again, talking about design specifically, the Federal Detention Center was made to house long-term, likely felony and high felony type offenders. And so it's really not intended to or made for the type of population that we're talking about, which, are mostly low-level felony C and below, meaning misdemeanors, petty misdemeanors, like being in the park after hours or low-level property crimes and things like that. So we don't necessarily want to put people into a position or a place like that was built for that purpose, because it really is going to be, for all the same reasons, more isolating, more alienating, and probably in a lot of the same ways increase the criminogenic risk in the future. So I don't, but we haven't weighed in on it. That's just, those are just my personal views.
Well, I hope that the Rep. Takayama's idea of moving forward with that would at least take care of some of the immediate overcrowding. It doesn't address the whole problem at all.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire problem. But back to the crowding at OCCC now in the pretrial, the thing that you mentioned that I also was struck by is that there are so many inmates in these dormitory settings where there's 50 to 60 people, men, in a room. And we know from the recidivism rates that a good number of them have been there before. And I can't help but think that if you've never committed a crime, repeat convicted, that can't do a lot as far as growth or
yes, exactly.
Rehabilitation.
No, it does not. And in fact, what it actually does is the opposite. It really traumatizes people. The trauma starts on day one when you're admitted, and it only grows from there. And being exposed to people who are more criminal, so to speak, than you are at that point is going to increase your likelihood of needing to react in certain ways in order to survive. But what we're talking about is, again, people who were already at risk, people who were poorer, and already kind of in a situation where they were being pushed into
fragile.
Yeah, right. They were already fragile, and then being in a state where a lot of people that are in the facilities are suffering from mental illness. And so being around a lot of those people, or if you yourself are suffering from mental illness, if you were not on the point of a psychotic break before you went in, you probably would be by the time you were released. And more so, if you had a job, you probably lost it. If you had a home, you probably lost it. And so now your criminogenic risk factors are all moving up and up through the roof, interpersonally as well as externally and socially. And all of your stabilizing factors, your family and all of that, if everything is being pulled apart and pushed away, it brings people into situations that they were already, like you said, very fragile, and it makes the situation a lot worse. So
we have only a few minutes to talk about what the legislature is planning to do about it. So tell me what kind of a bill is still alive.
Yeah, definitely. So we were talking a little bit about the task force, HR 134. They made kind of a wealth of recommendations. So I'll just kind of summarize really briefly.
Two that are still alive.
Okay, yeah. So the HR 134 task force one that's still alive is the HB 1289. And so they made a bunch of recommendations related to diversion and alternatives, reinforcing and expanding the law enforcement's ability to cite instead of arrest, which will help a lot. And then as well, expanding access to alternatives like home detention, like Mandy was talking about, electronic monitoring, but really trying to look at all the potential options to ensure somebody's accountability, but not necessarily keeping them detained. Also, a bunch of recommendations related to making the system more efficient, including requiring bail hearings at the very first appearance, requiring creating an electronic court reminder system, which is it seems silly at this point, but it's an easy fix. The judiciary is already working on bringing it up, and other states who have implemented it have seen a great jump in their ability to get people into court, and then as well more expedient risk assessments and bail reports, and then a few recommendations related to trying to reduce the population by, for example, regularly reviewing the jail population to see if there's any other people who are currently in who are eligible for release under any of the new policies, or if anything about their situations have changed that would make them now eligible. And then lastly, a lot of things related to financial bail. So looking at previously, we didn't look at defendants' financial circumstances, which is one of the big problems that we talked about. So now they're going to be required to look at the defendant's financial circumstances and to try to set money bail at reasonable amounts based on the defendant's means. And then as well, they have a new structure that kind of it tries to eliminate money bail as much as possible for very low-level offenses. Especially low-level nonviolent offenses. There are a few list of exceptions, but and then as well, just generally across the board, trying to require release, like Mandy said, under the least restrictive conditions to assure the defendant's appearance. So if there's any kind of a risk that they won't appear or that they're going to potentially cause danger to anyone, we want to make sure that they are that those risks are addressed directly.
How does the other bill differ from that?
So OHA's bill, which is SB 192, is the one that's still alive, offers an unsecured bail option, which is an alternative option that would place the bail appropriately at the end of the process instead of at the beginning. So instead of putting cash up front, people could petition the judge to receive unsecured bail if it would present a financial hardship for them, and staying detained would cause them to lose their job or their housing or whatever. And then if they only have to pay that bail amount if they actually don't show up, if they actually violate the conditions. And so other, like we were talking about earlier, other jurisdictions have implemented very similar systems. The Hawaii Federal District, with great success, they release 98% of their defendants on unsecured bail and have a 0% failure to appear rate.
And what are the chances in the legislature now for either or both of those bills?
Oh, I think we're going to see at least one, if not both of these measures pass.
That's really
I hope so,
good
anyway.
news, and we have run out of time. Doesn't the time go fast?
Yeah, we could talk
I know,
forever
we could
about
talk
this
about
issue.
this
Yeah,
forever. I
we
got a
do
lot to
actually.
say
We
about
talk all the
these
time.
measures.
Yeah.
I got a lot to say about it.
Sorry, I
So
didn't
thank
give
you
any
very
time.
much, Mandy
Fernandes.
okay, of ACLU, and Kamaile
Maldonado.
of Office of Hawaiian Affairs. I'm Pearl Johnson of the League of Women Voters, and my co-host is Kaui Lucas of the League of Women Voters. Thank you for watching.